Yo, what is going on, everyone? My name is Nick, or The Notorious Fantasy, and today I'm joined yet again with Flex. Shane, all of his links are down below in the description, as well as their podcast. It is very good. I listen to it every single week. I mean, I've said this a million times on the video. Let's get right into it. The first guy we're talking about here is Cam Akers. He played 11 games this year, probably from carrying the whole team on his back. 261 touches, 231 rushes, over 1,100 rush yards, 14 rushing touchdowns. He had 36 targets, 30 catches, 218 total receiving yards, 4 touchdowns. This guy is just a beast. The first thing I want to bring up here is, do you think that he is the best blocker on the Florida State team? Because it seems like he was.
The best blocker on the Florida State team. I think that's hilarious because, when you compare him to the other guys, like context matters, right? Especially when you're trying to really dissect these top prospects. And he had the 115th ranked offensive line, according to FF Outsiders. You compare that to a guy like J.K. Dobbins, who had the 8th ranked. It makes a big ass difference when you're getting almost a full yard before contact. So yeah, it's tough. It's tough for a guy like Cam Akers.
Yeah, it's tough when your offensive line just doesn't even work. It's like the Red Sea, it just splits, it's just wide open for Moses and the
Yeah,
defense.
exactly.
It's embarrassing. But Cam Akers literally performed so well with the worst line I've probably ever seen. I mean, like, people say that these NFL lines are bad. They don't do anything. The Cam Akers, it was just one versus the whole other team. It was just him versus the opposing team because he had no one to block for him, and he still got over 1,000 yards and 14 rushing touchdowns. So we've talked about this in every single video, but do you like his catching game, his receiving game?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, look, I would argue that Cam Akers was by far the best player on that team, and you saw it because they tried to get him involved. I mean, just like we talked about some of these other top prospects, other than like a Jonathan Taylor, you saw that he lined up probably 3, 4, 5 times in a game as a wide receiver. And again, it's not so much that they would necessarily always pass him the ball in those situations, but the fact that they needed to have, say, like a linebacker go and cover him and be aware of him out of the backfield because he did have the ability to catch the ball, it definitely makes a difference. And, I think one of the biggest knocks on a guy like Cam Akers relative to those other top players is because he didn't play on a team that was as good. Some of his general, again, I always like to call it just general accounting stats, aren't quite as good, right? Like you look at a yards per carry metric, and that's generally a pretty good indication of a running back's efficiency. And at the college level, you generally want a guy who's at least right around that 5 yards per carry. Cam Akers is just below that at 4.96. But then, you go back to the fact of, okay, if guys like Swift or J.K. Dobbins are getting that extra half of a yard to a full yard before contact, then you can just maybe add on half a yard or a full yard, and that puts him pretty much in the same conversation as those other players. So you wonder what he can do if he's actually on a competent NFL team.
Yeah, like imagine if Cam Akers had Mr. Dobbins' line, or if he had Swift's line, like he would be amazing.
Yep.
So that you obviously
Absolutely.
have to keep that into effect. Now, where do you think Akers goes in the real NFL draft? Because this is obviously huge for Akers' stock in Dynasty. So if he goes in the first or second round, typically that's where you look for your running back to go for them to have value within this year, say for like redraft purposes. But where do you think he goes? Do you think he's a day 2 pick, or do you think he falls out and goes day 3?
To be honest, I would be shocked if he fell out of day 2. I don't think he's a first-round pick. I don't think he's going to be a day 1 pick. I don't think he's that level of talent. For the most part, and you talk about rational coaching in the NFL, rational GMs in the NFL. It doesn't always translate to real life, but these teams, unless there's an elite prospect like a Jonathan Taylor, for the most part, they don't take running backs in the first round of the draft.
Yeah.
So then you're probably looking at a day 2, right? So day 2 is obviously rounds 2 and rounds 3. I could see Cam Akers simply because I think round 2 is going to be the round of the wide receiver, because there's so many good wide receivers.
Yeah.
I could see Cam Akers probably going mid to late second round, or more likely early third round, which again, still a day 2 pick. So that definitely matters.
Okay, now Cam Akers, out of all of the guys we have done videos on, we did Swift, Dobbins, Taylor, all down below in the description. He is the youngest of them all. We talked about this in the last video. The age doesn't really matter. He's like 6 months younger than all these other guys, so that does not matter. But his breakout age is actually the youngest out of all of these running backs at 18.2. We talked about this in the last video about breakout age, but just recap it real quick. Why do you think it is so important that he broke out at such a young age?
Look, breakout age is important because it means that he's on the field in order to break out. And that means his coaches trust him. So in a situation like Cam Akers at Florida State, he was not on the best team. So the fact that he was able to break out at such a young age, it matters because you want to see these guys get better. So if they break out at a younger age, it means that for the next couple of years in college, you're going to continue to get more and more usage. And if they get more and more usage, they continue to show consistently that they can probably translate that to the NFL level. Yeah. The problem is with a 16-game season, maybe 17-game season eventually in the NFL, we're naturally stuck with a small sample size, right? So if you only break out in, say, your senior year in college, you don't know, because that 3-year, 4-year college career is now only down to 1 year of data. It's a matter of consistency. NFL teams, they're investing in these players. And if they're going to invest a high round draft capital pick, a day 2 pick in one of these guys, they need to know that their skills in college are going to translate over to the NFL. So the fact that he's got a young breakout age, it means that he's been productive for a number of years in college. It means that it should and it could translate into the NFL.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Now, his 40 time at the combine was 4.47, so pretty normal for a guy that you think is going to be very good in the NFL. I mean, Taylor was a whole millisecond faster, but DeAndre Swift and him were very close together. So I think that speed is obviously going to be very important for the NFL. He did not somehow falter and do something that we completely thought that he was not going to do. Everyone assumed he would run fast, and he did. Now, you've compared him to Marlon Mack. Why is that?
Well, okay, so I guess I should say the way that we compare these players is based off of their metrics at the combine. It's comparable players in terms of their size, their speed, their vertical jumps or broad jumps and that sort of thing. So he does test out as a guy like Marlon Mack. And to be honest, like Marlon Mack is a productive running back in the NFL. One of the reasons that he really isn't in the conversation as one of these top 10 running backs is simply because he doesn't really catch the ball.
Yeah.
A guy like Cam Akers has shown that he knows how to catch the ball. And I bet we wanted not to get off on a tangent with a guy like Marlon Mack, but he might be a guy that you could probably get pretty good value on if you're picking him up in the 4th round of your draft, because with a quarterback like Phillip Rivers who likes to throw to the running back, that immediately is going to give him a little bit of a jolt in terms of fantasy production. So how that compares to a guy like Cam Akers is, again, if he gets into the right situation where, like, hell, if Cam Akers was to go to a team like Tampa Bay and he's shown that he could touch the ball, Ronald Jones he's meh at best, right?
He's terrible.
Well, and one of the biggest problems with Ronald Jones is that he's absolute garbage in the pass game. In terms of like pass blocking, right?
Yeah.
So Cam Akers is 217 pounds. He's got a BMI of 31.1, which means he's a thick mofo. And he's actually a pretty good pass blocker. So you add into the fact that you've got a quarterback like a Tom Brady who likes to throw to his running backs. If Cam Akers is going to end up in a situation like Tampa Bay, we talked about J.K. Dobbins could be in consideration for the 1.2. I would argue if Cam Akers was drafted by Tampa Bay, I'm probably drafting him at the 1.2 because he's shown that he can be productive on a shitty team. He's shown that he can pass block. He's shown that he can catch the ball. So he's kind of the complete package. And he's got a 39.8% college dominator rating. We talked about 40% is kind of that elite mark. And so he's pretty much elite. And that matters.
Yeah, honestly, that's amazing. I think if he went to Tampa Bay, he could literally be what James White did last year, just pure consistency every single game. James White in half PPR, full PPR was probably the most consistent flex you could ever throw in there. He was getting you 10 to 12 points every single game, and sometimes he'd go off and do better, but he was only under 10 points, I think, once or twice in New England. So James White obviously is much smaller. I perceive he's much smaller than a guy like Cam Akers. Cam Akers 5'10" and 217, like you said. But does height really influence where you view a guy? Because 5'10", out of all these guys, DeAndre Swift is the only one shorter than 5'10". Everyone else is 5'10". Is that like the normal size for running back? I don't even know.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about like kind of what sort of profile do you want in your every down running backs? And that 215 mark between about 5'10", 5'12", or 5'12", 6 feet.
Yeah.
That is kind of that nice little, like that's your ideal 3-down running back type player. And just going back to your comparison to James White, what it comes down to is trust, right? If Cam Akers, whether it's on the field with Tom Brady or even with any of these experienced quarterbacks like Phillip Rivers, if you have their trust in the backfield that you can catch the ball and that you can protect them, they're going to continue to get you more and more involved in the game. So Cam Akers, if he goes to the right situation, can be consistent. And it's consistency on a week-to-week basis that really makes a difference in terms of where you want to draft these guys as like a second-round running back or like a sixth-round running back. If this guy's putting up a consistent 15 points a week, you're going to probably consider him and with one of your early picks. And having that low or that high floor because you can catch the ball and get that half a point or a full point in PPR, that makes a big difference for sure.
Okay. Now, something I brought up in every other video as well is the team total yard percentage for these guys. Cam Akers is 26.5, which is the third highest out of the four. But I argue that this number is very important. But I argue if he was on a better team, he would have so many more yards. Like that line was better.
Yeah.
He'd probably be up there with Dobbins and Taylor at 32 plus. So what do you think about that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I don't have the stats in front of me, but we just wonder how many times he pretty much like ran into a wall at the line of scrimmage just because his offensive line wasn't able to let him get his feet moving. And that was one of the things I actually liked about Cam Akers was that because he's so stout, he's got a very strong just lower body in general, that he's the kind of guy that when you're on the 1 yard line and you're pretty much goal to go, he can get you that extra half a yard with his legs, just pretty much churning and not stopping moving those legs. And so, yeah, I mean, the 26.5, I think that's pretty good. On a better team, you could also argue that maybe there's more competition to get all of those touches. So it's sometimes tough to really justify that. But the fact that he's got literally over a quarter of the entire team's total yards, that makes an absolute difference for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
And the thing is, it also provides context when you're looking at total rush yards, right? I mean, J.K. Dobbins had over 2,000 rush yards, whereas Cam Akers had only 1,146. But yet he still had 26% of the team. So it helps provide context for other metrics that we look at.
Yeah. Now, another stat I want to bring up real quick, and I haven't even brought this up in any other video, but it's touches per fumble. So he had 87 touches per fumble. He fumbled the ball 3 total times. Does that worry you at all? Because it would not worry me at all because of how shit the line was. Like, we've talked about this a million times. Like, he has no chance sometimes when he's fumbling the ball.
No, I mean, obviously a higher number is better. I mean, this is actually, again, we're just comparing the top 4 prospects. He's second. Number 1 was J.K. Dobbins with 107. He's with 87. Like, that's pretty good. He only had 3 fumbles last year. Obviously 0 is the best number, but it's not always realistic. And I think that's not something to be afraid of. It's not something to scare you off from.
Okay, that's good because I don't know, some guys that I just worry about them having like fumbling problems. Like we talked about Chris Carson in another video, you'll get benched. If this guy ends up in Seattle, Pete Carroll will chew his gum and then chew you out and bench you because he does not give a fuck. If you fumble the ball, he will sit you down regardless of your talent. So that's obviously a worry.
Although I would argue Chris Carson fumbled the ball way too often and still got on the freaking field, but that's also because of a lack of options.
Yeah, it's because Penny just was in the injury tent. He loves that blue injury tent. So, yeah, I think that Cam Akers is going to be obviously a very great talent in the NFL. We hope he goes in the first 2 days because if he doesn't, then his stocks in fantasy literally will hit the bottom. It'll go from the top straight to the bottom of the earth if someone else gets drafted above him, like any of those other guys that people like talking about, like Booger's son, maybe. Obviously, he's not that good, but he's just one of those names. Yeah, I love that guy. He has a sick hairdo. But you got anything else on Cam Akers?
No, I mean, look, just to kind of put a bow on all 4 of these running back prospects, I think that in your rookie dynasty leagues, assuming that these guys go to reasonable situations, don't overthink it. These guys will provide an immediate jolt to your team. Whether you're strong at running back or weak at running back, I think that you go for the best player available, especially around one of these rookie draft picks. I would say the top 4 picks should be 4 running backs, and pick your poison in terms of who you want to be. I mean, I would argue JT is number 1, but for these next 3 guys, whoever you like the best, pull the trigger on them. don't overthink it too much because it's, you know, at the end of the day, it's your dynasty team. You want to like the players that you're drafting. So if you're trying to, you know, you would probably maybe go Cam Akers over J.K. Dobbins. Again, everything being equal. Whereas I would maybe go J.K. Dobbins over Cam Akers, but, you know, go for the guy that you like and that you're excited to watch. And frankly, all four of these guys are going to be exciting to watch at the next level.
100%. Now, one last thing real quick. So if you're in a Superflex league, do you think Joe Burrow and Tua before these guys like 100% of the time, or would you go with, say, Taylor over a guy like Tua or Burrow? I mean, Tua has injury concerns, but.
Well, listen, so if it was me, and I generally only play in Superflex leagues now. I'm in a few non-Superflex leagues that I've just been playing in for a long time, but generally speaking, if there's a guy like Joe Burrow and he's just that elite talent, then you're probably doing yourself a disservice to not draft him at the 101. But between him and Jonathan Taylor, I think there's at least a conversation. Joe Burrow is probably going to start in week 1, which means he's going to have an immediate impact to your team. Yeah. But I think it's a conversation between Jonathan Taylor and Joe Burrow. So for me, if I'm just ranking in Superflex, I'm probably going Joe Burrow at the 101. Then I'm probably going to go Jonathan Taylor at the 2. And then very likely Tua at the 3. The only risk with a guy like Tua is just the fact that there's just that general uncertainty with the hip, right? I mean, at the combine, it showed that he was progressing and that there's likely, you know, you look at some of these doctors that like Dr. David Chow, for example, and he's basically saying that he doesn't expect there to be a long-term impact on his career, which means you can probably trust him long-term. Yeah. He's not going to be one of these guys that's going to be injured and he's going to be glass for his entire career. That injury isn't necessarily going to lead to further injuries. So I would argue Tua probably at 3, and then I would go the next 3 running backs, and then I would probably go Justin Herbert.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
I would round it out, yeah.
Okay, so do you got anything else on him, or are we good here?
No, I think we're good.
All right, so thank you to Shane, obviously, for coming on. Shane is on the Flex Network. I've said before, all of his links are down below in the description. If you guys enjoyed, please click that subscribe button as well. Shane will probably be back for some more videos in the offseason. I may even come on their podcast eventually if they would be so kind to let me on. So Absolutely. Thank you guys. Thank you guys all for watching. I love you all. Make sure to tell your loved ones you love them because this coronavirus shit is fucked up and you never know what's going to happen at the end of the day. So I love you all. Have a great rest of your day. Goodbye.